They looked like any other neighborhoods: quiet streets, friendly neighbors, safe homes. But behind the doors of these seemingly peaceful towns, something terrifying was festering. Secrets so dark, crimes so twisted, they were almost lost forever. From killers who lived among families to victims hidden in plain sight, these stories aren't just disturbing, they prove that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes, it lives right next door. These are 5 innocent towns hiding horrifying crimes. The vanishing at Cedar Hollow. Cedar Hollow wasn't the kind of town where things went unsolved. Nestled among Oregon's thick conifer forests, it was small, steady, and quiet, the kind of place where the local newspaper's front page mostly covered high school football or a city council meeting. So when 16-year-old Eliza Barrett disappeared on the evening of October 14, 2003, the town froze. Not out of shock, but disbelief. Things like that didn't happen in Cedar Hollow. Eliza was last seen walking her golden retriever, Max, just before sundown. Her mother remembered Eliza grabbing a flashlight and heading toward the familiar trail behind their property. The trail wound along a creek, cutting through private land and looping back near the community lake. She walked it nearly every day. She never came back. Max returned 2 hours later, whimpering and covered in mud. Most alarming were the bloodstains on his chest and the long, red scratches along his back. A torn leash hung from his collar. The sheriff's department launched a search the next morning, and the entire town showed up. Helicopters, dogs, volunteer firemen, every effort was exhausted. After 4 days, all they found was the flashlight near the creek, its lens cracked, and something far more disturbing: a canine tooth, human, not Max's, embedded in the fabric of the leash. Investigators theorized a struggle. Eliza was likely attacked, and the dog fought back. But there were no footprints, no drag marks, and no blood trail. Despite thousands of man-hours, nothing turned up. Her parents held a vigil every year, eventually moving out of town in 2009. But the town never forgot. Then, in 2022, a letter arrived at the newsroom of the Cedar Hollow Gazette. The letter was typed and unsigned. It said, "The sheriff knows what happened to Eliza. Ask him about the night before. Ask him who came to visit from Idaho." The current editor, a young journalist named Natalie Pierce, brought the letter to the local police. It wasn't the first hoax they'd seen over the years, but something about it rattled her. She dug through the archives and found a single report, buried in a routine call log. On the night before Eliza vanished, a traffic stop had been made just outside town. The driver had Idaho plates. The car was never searched, and the stop was not documented further. The arresting officer? Sheriff William Hart himself. Natalie filed a records request and started digging into Hart's background. On the surface, he was the town's golden boy, born and raised in Cedar Hollow, decorated in the Army, and beloved as sheriff for nearly 3 decades. But there were gaps, particularly between 1989 and 1991, when he supposedly left for family matters. She discovered that during that time, Hart had briefly worked at a private juvenile detention facility in Idaho, which was later shut down for alleged abuse and cover-ups. One of the guards there, Russell Kane, was accused of inappropriate conduct with minors, but the charges were dropped after key witnesses vanished. The facility, Northern Star Youth Academy, was known for redirecting troubled youth, but several teens had disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. Hart's name appeared on a list of temporary staff. Kane's name appeared in connection with multiple internal investigations. Natalie presented her findings to the current Cedar Hollow police chief, but he waved it off as conspiracy chasing. So she reached out to Eliza's mother, now living in Arizona. When Mrs. Barrett heard Kane's name, her voice cracked. She remembered seeing a strange man in a gray van parked across from their home a few days before the disappearance. He'd asked for directions to the highway. She'd told this to Hart, she said, but he told her it wasn't important. Natalie published her story online, The Vanishing at Cedar Hollow. Did Sheriff Hart bury the truth? It gained national traction, and soon the state was forced to open an inquiry. Sheriff Hart, now retired and in poor health, refused all interviews. 2 months later, he died of a stroke at 71. But the story wasn't over. After Hart's death, his nephew, cleaning out the sheriff's old storage unit, discovered a sealed envelope addressed simply to the people of Cedar Hollow. Inside were 3 items: a map of the trail Eliza had walked, a photo of a man, later confirmed to be Russell Kane, and a note that read, "I thought I could keep him away. I thought I scared him off. But I was wrong. I'm sorry." Following this lead, searchers returned to the area around the trail, this time using ground-penetrating radar. In a shallow ravine, 50 yards off the path and covered with years of debris, they found a metal lockbox buried under stones. Inside were the remains of a backpack, a pair of tennis shoes, and a few strands of human hair later confirmed to belong to Eliza Barrett. Russell Kane was finally located in rural Idaho, living under a new name. At 63, he was arrested without incident. He denied everything, but in his home they found souvenirs from multiple cold cases, including a necklace belonging to Eliza. Kane was charged with Eliza's murder and is currently awaiting trial. Cedar Hollow's sense of peace was forever changed. For years, they believed she'd simply vanished into the woods. But the truth had been much closer and far darker than anyone had guessed. The one person sworn to protect the town had allowed a predator in, and then spent the rest of his life hiding it. The Morse Code murders. It began quietly, as these things often do. On March 2, 1997, police in Winnipeg were called to the apartment of a 45-year-old librarian named Helen Drumlin. Her neighbor reported hearing strange thuds during the night, followed by silence. When officers arrived, they found the door unlocked. Helen's body was discovered in the living room, slumped over her coffee table. She had been strangled with a telephone cord. On the table in front of her sat a sheet of paper, filled with what looked like random dots and dashes typed on an old typewriter. The coroner confirmed she had been killed sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, and no DNA left behind. But the note, clean, crisp, and untouched, puzzled everyone. It looked like Morse code, but no one knew why it was there or who had typed it. 3 weeks later, it happened again. A 60-year-old piano teacher named Ronald Kessler was found dead in his home across town. He had been poisoned with cyanide-laced tea. And on his kitchen table, another note, the same clean format, dots and dashes, this time typed on a different typewriter, but unmistakably the same pattern. Police now believed they had a serial killer on their hands. The media called it the Morse Code Killer. Panic spread slowly through the city. There were no apparent connections between the victims. Different neighborhoods, different ages, different lifestyles. But when a third victim turned up, a university student named Danya Patel, just 22 years old, authorities realized there was something darker at play. Her note, too, was in Morse code. This time, someone at the local university's linguistics department offered to help decode it. The message read, Romans 12 verse 19. It was a Bible verse, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." Investigators raced to decode the previous notes. Helen Drumlin's message read, "Judgment is coming." Ronald Kessler's note read, "Repent." The killer wasn't just leaving clues, he was sermonizing. The police now had a pattern, victims with no connections, but each marked by religious judgment. The city launched a task force. Every church and religious group was investigated. Hundreds of hours were spent interviewing priests, pastors, ex-seminarians, even cult survivors. But nothing stuck. Then, after the fourth killing, a 33-year-old bartender named Mikey Roy, something changed. Roy's note contained a new verse, Proverbs 6 verses 16 to 19. It listed the 7 things the Lord hates, including hands that shed innocent blood. There was no question anymore. The killer was punishing people he considered sinners. But again, the victims had no known ties to one another. What connected them? Why had these specific people been chosen? A breakthrough came from an unlikely place. A former theology professor named Dr. Alan Brinks, who had been disgraced and fired in 1993 for alleged misconduct. He reached out to the police, claiming he recognized the biblical pattern. According to Brinks, The killer wasn't just choosing random verses. He was following a sequence he himself had once lectured about, a theoretical road of divine justice he had mapped for a class on religious extremism. The theory outlined a symbolic punishment path based on escalating sins. The verses were in the same order Brinks had presented. He believed someone had attended his class, internalized the message, and turned it into doctrine. Police now had a new suspect pool, students who had taken Brinks's class between 1990 and 1993. That list contained over 300 names, but one stood out: Jonathan Creel, a quiet, middle-aged man who had since become a custodian at a local Catholic school. Creel had no criminal record, no history of violence, and no known affiliations with any radical groups. But his name appeared in Brinks's gradebook. When questioned, Creel was cooperative but vague. He admitted remembering Brinks's lectures, claimed they were interesting, denied any involvement in the murders. Police lacked evidence. He was watched but never arrested. And then the killings stopped. Years passed. The case went cold. Creel moved away, changed jobs, disappeared from public view. No new victims emerged. No new notes. Just silence. In 2011, 14 years after the last known murder, a local archivist scanning old church records discovered something strange. A donation slip dated 1996 in the name of J. Creel, listing all 4 victims' names on the memo line. The archivist turned it in, and investigators reopened the case. But Creel was long gone. His last known address was abandoned. No trace of him was found. Some believe he fled the country. Others believe he died and the killings died with him. But no charges were ever filed. No trial ever held. What disturbed people most wasn't just that the killer might still be alive. It was that the victims were chosen for reasons no one could fully understand, decisions made by a self-appointed judge operating on theology, delusion, or both. To this day, the Morse code murders remain technically unsolved. The Blue Barn Massacre. Snow had fallen heavily in Hollifield, Indiana on the night of January 18, 2010. The wind had buried the roads in thick drifts, isolating the rural town in eerie silence. Most stayed indoors that night, huddled under blankets, heaters humming steadily. But at 2:13 a.m., a 911 call pierced the stillness. The voice on the other end was male, panicked, whispering frantically, "They're all dead. Blue Barn. Please, please hurry." The call disconnected before dispatchers could trace it properly. By the time a snowplow cleared the road to the outskirts of Hollifield, where the Blue Barn stood, the sun had already risen. The barn was known to locals as a dilapidated storage building that hadn't been in use since the early 90s. Some kids hung out there to drink or smoke, but it had never been associated with anything violent. Until now. Inside, officers found 5 bodies. All of them were arranged in a perfect circle, seated on the floor as if in some kind of ritual. They had been murdered in different ways: one stabbed, one strangled, one shot, one suffocated, one bludgeoned. But what unified the scene was the unmistakable presence of blue paint. Each victim's face was covered in it, thick, dripping down over eyes, mouths and chins. The same paint marked the barn walls and symbols: triangles, spirals, and a strange rune resembling a mirrored letter E. The victims were identified as Jonah Wells, 29, a truck driver; Lucia Kim, 26, a piano teacher; Darrell Holmes, 31, a mechanic; Natalie Price, 33, a social worker; Xavier Liu, 28, a bartender. None of them appeared to know each other. No common workplaces, no overlapping friend groups, no cult activity, no church links. They lived in neighboring towns and cities, all within a 100-mile radius of Hollifield, but that was the only shared detail. The local police, overwhelmed, handed the case off to the Indiana State Bureau of Investigation. Agent Clarice Greer took the lead. She began by analyzing the symbols. Linguists were consulted. Some believed the markings had Nordic roots, others suggested they were purely invented. A former cult deprogrammer claimed they matched patterns used by a short-lived death cult from the 70s called the Infinite Fold, but there was no hard evidence tying the group to Hollifield. Fingerprints inside the barn belonged only to the victims. There were no footprints outside due to the snowstorm, and the snow itself showed no signs of vehicles entering or leaving. Then came a strange twist. 2 weeks after the massacre, a small envelope arrived at the Hollifield Sheriff's Office. Inside was a photograph, a grainy image of the 5 victims seated in the barn, still alive. They were bound and gagged, heads tilted upward, their faces already smeared in blue paint. On the back, scribbled in messy block letters, "The fold is never closed." The message sent waves through the task force. Greer dove deeper into the infinite fold, a fringe spiritual group formed in 1973 by a man named Everett Lang. Lang claimed divine visions had shown him the world's true geometry, and that enlightenment could only be achieved by realigning the self through terror and acceptance. The group disbanded in 1981 after a failed group suicide, but Lang was never found. One name on the cult's original member list stood out: Martin Wells, father of Jonah Wells, one of the victims. Greer interviewed Martin, now in his 70s and living in a retirement community. He admitted his past affiliation but denied any knowledge of the massacre. He hadn't spoken to Jonah in years due to a falling out. "My sins are my own," he said. Jonah knew that. He stayed away. Greer wasn't convinced. She pulled Martin's phone records and discovered something chilling. He'd received a call the night before the murders from a burner phone located near Hollifield. The call lasted 12 seconds. Surveillance footage at a gas station 5 miles from the barn showed a man matching Martin's height and build, wearing a thick coat and gloves, buying duct tape and rope. The footage's timestamp? 2 hours before the 911 call. A warrant was issued. Martin's home was searched. In a locked shed on the retirement center's property, they found cans of blue paint, exactly the same shade used in the murders, and a notebook containing hand-drawn versions of the barn's symbols. Still, there was no direct evidence linking him to the scene. He refused to speak further and eventually requested a lawyer. Before the case could move forward, Martin Wells was found dead in his cell 3 days later. Hanging from a belt, blue paint smeared across his mouth and eyelids. He'd left no note. The case was labeled unresolved with probable involvement, but not officially closed. Agent Greer pressed on, analyzing phone records from nearby towers. One pinged off a nearby tree farm, only once, during the estimated window of the crime. Investigators followed the lead. Behind the barn, beneath a false wall, they found a hidden chamber, 8 feet by 8 feet, lined with crude drawings, old bones, wax drippings, and a set of initials carved into the floor. E.L. It was the signature of Everett Lang. The discovery made national headlines. Some believed the fold had returned. Others saw it as a long-delayed final act by a dying cultist passing the torch to no one. Today, the Blue Barn still stands, but it's sealed by local order and considered a crime scene. No arrests were ever made. The motive was never confirmed. The FBI keeps a file open, but without new leads, it remains one of Indiana's most chilling unsolved crimes. Residents of Hollifield don't speak about it. Kids are warned never to go near the barn. And every winter, on the anniversary of the massacre, someone leaves a single blue candle outside its doors. No one ever sees who. The quiet tenant. In the heart of Jackson Heights, New York, stood a modest 4-story brownstone owned by 67-year-old Evelyn Mora, a retired schoolteacher known for renting out rooms to college students and young professionals. Her tenants came and went, and most found her to be kind but private. She kept a garden on the roof, baked for her neighbors, and was quick to help when someone forgot their keys. But in the spring of 2016, Evelyn disappeared, and no one seemed to notice. It was a neighbor, Mrs. D'Souza from across the hall, who first raised the alarm. Evelyn hadn't picked up her mail in over 2 weeks, and her cat, Miso, had been crying at the door for days. Police were called. The apartment was locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. Inside, everything was neat. Too neat. Evelyn's purse was still on the table. Her phone had a dead battery on the charger. Her last outgoing text was sent to a tenant on the 3rd floor named Caleb Warwick, reminding him to take the trash out on Tuesdays. But Evelyn herself was nowhere to be found. Police spoke to Caleb. He was quiet, polite, well-dressed. A 28-year-old data analyst who'd lived in the building for a year and a half. He told them he hadn't seen Evelyn in days, and assumed she'd gone on one of her retreats. She was known to visit monasteries upstate from time to time. There was no reason to suspect him. Until they checked the basement. During a second sweep of the building, an officer noticed a strong chemical odor seeping through the floorboards in the laundry room. Following the scent led them to a small maintenance hatch behind the washing machines. Inside was a hidden crawlspace, recently cleaned, but still stained with traces of blood. Luminol testing revealed a violent scene. Blood spatter, wiped walls, and drag marks led to the building's garbage chute. A cadaver dog was brought in. Within hours, investigators retrieved a bloodied bedsheet and a fragment of scalp with gray hair from the trash collection site beneath the building. DNA confirmed it belonged to Evelyn Mora. The building went into lockdown. All tenants were questioned again. This time, a chilling discovery was made. A fingerprint on the hatch door belonged to Caleb Warwick. When confronted, Caleb didn't deny being in the basement. "I like to fix things," he said. The pipe was leaking. But further investigation revealed more damning evidence. Evelyn's missing phone had pinged one last time, just before dying, on the 3rd floor, inside Caleb's unit. They obtained a warrant. What they found behind Caleb's apartment door stunned even seasoned officers. His bedroom had been converted into a surveillance hub. Monitors displayed live and recorded footage from tiny, hidden cameras installed around the building. In hallways, stairwells, even inside smoke detectors in other tenants' rooms. He'd been watching everyone, for months. The footage stored on his hard drive included hours of video of Evelyn, particularly in her kitchen and living room. One clip showed her asleep on the couch. In another, she argued on the phone about evicting a tenant, though it was unclear who. Then came the final video. Evelyn sitting at her kitchen table, visibly upset, as someone off-camera spoke calmly. "You knew, and you weren't going to let it go," the voice said. She stood up, shouted something unintelligible, and then the screen cut to static. Audio analysis matched the voice to Caleb. Faced with this evidence, Caleb finally confessed, but not fully. He admitted to an argument that went too far. Claimed Evelyn hit her head, and that he panicked. But the injuries told a different story. The fragment of skull showed blunt force trauma consistent with a hammer. No such tool was ever found. In court, Caleb's defense painted him as an intelligent but socially isolated man who became obsessed with Evelyn after she threatened to evict him for spying on other tenants. Prosecutors presented him as a calculated predator who turned his landlord into a target, then tried to erase her. But the trial took a stranger turn when detectives reopened cold cases linked to Caleb's past. 10 years earlier, while attending college in Vermont, Caleb's dorm roommate had gone missing. The case went nowhere due to a lack of evidence. Another case from a town in Maine showed a pattern. Caleb had briefly rented a room in a woman's home. She was later found dead, ruled a suicide. No one suspected Caleb, until now. Though these cases weren't admissible in court, they painted a profile. Caleb Warwick was not just a voyeur. He may have been a serial killer in disguise, moving from city to city, hiding in plain sight. In 2019, he was convicted of the second-degree murder of Evelyn Mora and sentenced to life without parole. After his conviction, detectives searched through more of his digital storage. In a locked folder, they found videos of 4 different women, none of whom had ever reported anything suspicious. One of them, from North Carolina, was later confirmed dead, another suicide, another cold case reopened. The media dubbed him the quiet tenant. Calm, unassuming, invisible, until it was too late. Evelyn's brownstone was eventually sold, gutted, and remodeled. New tenants moved in, never knowing what had happened within those walls. But each year on April 3rd, the day Evelyn vanished, someone leaves a bouquet of marigolds at the building's doorstep. No note, no name, just the flowers she used to grow on the roof. The shadow on Ridgefield Lane. Ridgefield Lane was the kind of neighborhood realtors loved to showcase. Quiet, tree-lined, and full of well-kept homes with tidy lawns. In the fall of 2003, the kind of horror that should have belonged to a different world crept into this peaceful Massachusetts suburb in the most unsuspecting way, through a single-family home at 112 Ridgefield Lane, rented by a man named Carter Wynn. Wynn was polite, punctual with rent, and largely kept to himself. He told the property manager he was a freelance translator who preferred to work at night. Neighbors remembered him as quiet but odd, never seen at block parties or community events. Lights in his house flickered at strange hours. Sometimes, they'd hear faint knocking sounds, like someone tapping on the walls. No one suspected anything until October 28, when 5-year-old Zoe Martin vanished from her backyard just 3 doors down. A search party of over 200 people canvassed the area. Dogs, helicopters, media, everyone joined in. No sign of her. No security cameras. No ransom note. Just nothing. Police knocked on every door, including Carter Wynn's. He answered calmly, said he hadn't seen anything unusual. Let them look around. Main floor, second floor, everything clean. No evidence, no reason to dig deeper. He even offered the officers a glass of water. They moved on. But Zoe wasn't the first child to disappear. A similar case had occurred 1 year prior, 10 miles away. Same age. Same circumstances. That girl was never found, either. It was Zoe's older brother, Jason, who unknowingly cracked the case. 2 weeks after the disappearance, he told his parents he saw a tall shadow man open the gate and wave Zoe over. He didn't scream, didn't run, because he said Zoe walked like she knew him. Police re-reviewed local registry files and found something chilling. Carter Wynn had legally changed his name in 1997. His former name was Isaac Demmer, a once-convicted child abuser who had been released early due to prison overcrowding. The law at the time didn't require him to register under his new identity due to a loophole that had since been closed. The house was raided. What they found shocked even seasoned detectives. Behind a false panel in the basement, they discovered a narrow hallway leading to a soundproofed room. Inside were children's clothes, blankets, bottles of water, and a heavily scratched door on the other end. A single bare light bulb hung from the ceiling. There were restraints on the floor. And in one corner, beneath a blanket, was a small video camera wired to a VCR. The footage found inside showed Zoe, terrified, crying, held in that room for over a week before the recordings suddenly stopped. There was no body in the room. But that door, scratched, dented, stained, led to a small hatch at the back of the basement wall. Beyond it was a crawlspace that led to the woods behind Ridgefield Lane. A week-long search ensued. Zoe's remains were found less than a mile away, beneath a collapsed drainage pipe. Her hands were tied, and she had been dead for at least 10 days. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was starvation and exposure. Wynn, Demmer, had fled before the raid. A manhunt began, stretching across multiple states. He was added to the FBI's most wanted list. Tips poured in, but nothing solid. Until one lead took them to a rest stop in New Hampshire, where an attendant claimed a man matching Wynn's photo had bought a burner phone and a sleeping bag. He had left in a gray sedan with stolen plates. A chase ensued when state troopers spotted the vehicle. Wynn crashed into a tree during the pursuit and attempted to flee on foot. He was caught in the woods after a brief struggle. He had a knife and a small notebook on him, filled with unsettling sketches, drawings of houses, parks, schoolyards. Each one labeled with a name and a date. Some dates were in the future. During interrogation, Wynn admitted to 3 other abductions, 2 of which were already known to police. The third, a girl named Amanda Grace, had been missing since 1999, her case considered cold. Wynn offered details that only the abductor could know. He said, disturbingly, that he never meant to hurt them, only to preserve them. When asked what he meant, he refused to elaborate. His trial drew national attention. The basement recordings were shown in court, under seal. Families were ushered out during their playing. Many jurors couldn't watch. Wynn showed no emotion throughout. No remorse. He was convicted on multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and unlawful imprisonment. The judge ordered multiple life sentences, with no possibility of parole. Wynne is currently held at a maximum security facility in upstate New York. 112 Ridgefield Lane was demolished 6 months later. No one wanted to live there. The city converted the lot into a memorial garden for Zoe Martin and the other victims. Every year, residents gather on October 28, lighting candles along the edge of the garden in silence. To this day, some parents in the neighborhood swear their kids still talk about the shadow man who lives in the woods. Just stories, they say. But others aren't so sure.